The incident begins in a crowded urban setting during daylight hours, where a senior corporate executive is shot in public without warning. The attack appears targeted with no signs of robbery, escalation, or collateral harm to bystanders. Witness accounts describe a brief encounter, followed by the shooter leaving the area calmly. The absence of panic or pursuit in the immediate aftermath suggests prior planning. Law enforcement rapidly secures the scene and initiates a high-priority investigation. Early statements frame the event as a deliberate assassination rather than an impulsive act. Surveillance review focuses on approach routes, timing, and the shooter's exit path. Initial evidence indicates familiarity with the location and routine movements of the victim. Authorities release limited details while expanding the search perimeter. A nationwide alert is issued as investigators assess potential risk beyond the immediate area.
You're an American, you believe in the American criminal justice system, you have to presume him to be innocent, and none of us would want anything.
Public reaction diverges quickly from expectations typically associated with such crimes. Expressions of sympathy are mixed with indifference, and in some cases, approval. Online discourse shifts attention from the act itself to the industry the victim represented. Commentary frames the killing within broader grievances about access, cost, and denial of services.
One friend made the comment, he thought it was, he goes, don't that look like...
The case becomes a focal point for long-standing frustration toward private healthcare systems. Historical criticism resurfaces, emphasizing claims of delayed approvals and denied coverage. Personal anecdotes circulate describing severe outcomes linked to administrative decisions. A recurring phrase emerges as shorthand for alleged industry practices.
At that question, and he didn't really answer it directly.
This framing reshapes public discussion away from the individual crime. Authorities reiterate that the shooting remains a criminal act under investigation. Officials emphasize due process and warn against justification of violence. The scale of the law enforcement response draws additional scrutiny. Resource deployment is compared to responses in other high-profile cases. Critics question whether status influenced urgency and visibility.
Is really only as good as the public helping them. That's really the bottom line. That you cannot...
Social platforms amplify the divide through memes and symbolic gestures. These reactions further blur the boundary between crime reporting and social critique. Investigators continue to withhold suspect details while verifying leads. The absence of immediate identification fuels speculation. Media coverage balances scene reconstruction with analysis of public sentiment. The narrative expands beyond a single act of violence. Structural accountability becomes a central theme. The investigation proceeds amid intense public attention.
I don't think it's a surprise that he picked the location that he picked, because it gave...
Evidence collection prioritizes verifiable actions over commentary. Officials caution against drawing conclusions without confirmed facts. The case sets the stage for broader examination of motive and impact. Attention remains divided between justice for the act and critique of the system. The shooter remains unidentified at this stage. The public conversation continues to evolve. Institutions prepare for sustained scrutiny. The inquiry advances under heightened pressure. Clarity remains limited in the early phase. The investigation moves forward.
Cause-driven crime, they lock on, it gives them a purpose, and they believe the only way they can...
Part 2 follows the escalation of the investigation as authorities broaden the search beyond the immediate crime scene. Surveillance footage is reviewed across multiple locations to reconstruct the shooter's movements before and after the attack. Analysts focus on timing, route selection, and behavioral cues indicating premeditation. Law enforcement emphasizes that the absence of collateral harm suggests a singular objective. Investigators assess whether the shooter had prior knowledge of the victim's schedule. Security protocols surrounding the victim are examined for vulnerabilities. Attention turns to the corporate role the victim held and its public visibility. UnitedHealthcare's market position and influence become central to public discussion.
He states how we are the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world. Yet
critics highlight the company's size, reach, and impact on healthcare access. Past regulatory actions and lawsuits are referenced in media analysis. Public commentary increasingly frames the killing as symbolic rather than personal. Online narratives argue that systemic harm contextualizes the act without excusing it. Authorities counter that motive does not diminish criminal responsibility. Officials stress that justification narratives can obstruct objective investigation. The scale of the manhunt intensifies as tips are evaluated nationwide. False leads and misinformation complicate early progress.
Honored to be speaking to you all today on behalf of the Gilman class of 2016.
Investigators filter reports to isolate verifiable evidence. Public briefings remain measured to avoid amplifying speculation. Media outlets track the contrast between official restraint and online fervor. Social platforms continue to circulate polarized reactions. Memes and slogans gain traction, reshaping public perception. The phrase associated with insurance practices becomes a rallying point.
He did let me know that the severity of his back issue was such.
This discourse overshadows conventional victim-centered narratives. Authorities acknowledge public anger while reiterating legal boundaries. Investigators maintain focus on the shooter's actions and logistics. Behavioral profiling considers ideology, grievance, and opportunity. No definitive motive is confirmed at this stage. Law enforcement resists premature conclusions. Corporate security measures are quietly reassessed. Industry leaders monitor potential copycat risk.
People have real frustration with our healthcare system. This killer is being.
Officials increase patrols in sensitive locations. The investigation intersects with broader societal debate. Evidence collection continues methodically. Analysts emphasize separating facts from sentiment. The case remains open and fluid. Public attention shows no signs of diminishing. Institutional scrutiny intensifies. Investigators prepare for a prolonged inquiry. The narrative continues to expand. Resolution remains uncertain. The manhunt persists. The case advances into its next phase. Part 3 centers on the identification of a suspect as investigators consolidate surveillance data, witness statements, and digital traces. Authorities confirm that the suspect was apprehended after a coordinated operation ending the immediate manhunt. Items recovered at the time of arrest include weapons, cash, and written materials suggesting ideological motivation. These materials prompt debate over whether the act was politically or socially driven. Officials caution that possession of writings alone does not establish motive. The suspect's background quickly becomes a subject of public scrutiny. Early reports contradict common stereotypes associated with similar acts of violence. This contradiction fuels further discussion about intent and grievance. Investigators reconstruct the suspect's movements leading up to the shooting. Evidence indicates deliberate preparation rather than spontaneous action. Contacts, purchases, and travel patterns are examined for signs of planning. Law enforcement emphasizes that no accomplices have been identified. Authorities reject claims of an organized network without corroboration. Public reaction to the arrest remains polarized. Some express relief that the threat has ended. Others interpret the arrest through the same systemic lens applied to the crime. Online narratives frame the suspect as either criminal or symbol. Media coverage highlights this division rather than narrowing it. Officials reiterate the importance of due process. Statements stress presumption of innocence until adjudication. The recovered writings are reviewed for authenticity and context. Analysts warn against selective quotation. Investigators seek corroboration between expressed views and actions. Attention returns to the shooting itself. Ballistics and forensic analysis confirm a single shooter. The weapon's origin and acquisition are traced. No evidence suggests random targeting. The act remains classified as intentional homicide. Prosecutors begin preparing formal charges. Legal proceedings move toward initial hearings. Public debate intensifies as the case enters the judicial phase. Commentary expands beyond the facts of the arrest. Structural grievances continue to dominate discourse. Authorities urge restraint in interpretation. Evidence gathering remains ongoing. The investigation shifts focus from pursuit to prosecution. Security assessments remain elevated. Institutions anticipate extended scrutiny. The narrative continues to evolve. Clarity increases incrementally. Definitive motive remains unconfirmed. The case progresses to the next stage. Part 4 examines the early legal proceedings as prosecutors outline charges and present an initial framework of intent and causation. Court filings emphasize the act as a targeted killing carried out with prior planning. Defense counsel challenges interpretations of motive, arguing against ideological classification. Judges caution against conflating public sentiment with evidentiary standards. Hearings focus on procedural matters, including jurisdiction and admissibility. Prosecutors introduce surveillance timelines to establish sequence of events. These timelines aim to demonstrate deliberate preparation rather than impulse. The recovered writings are contextualized within broader personal history. Analysts note that interpretation of these materials remains contested. The court restricts public disclosure of certain evidentiary details. Media coverage adapts to limited access, emphasizing analysis over revelation. Public reaction continues to reflect deep division. Some frame the proceedings as a test of accountability. Others view them as an extension of systemic conflict. Authorities reiterate that the judicial process will determine responsibility. Law enforcement reduces visible presence as immediate threat subsides. Corporate entities reassess security protocols quietly. Industry leaders express concern about copycat risk. Officials monitor online rhetoric for escalation. Investigators coordinate with federal agencies regarding threat assessment. Attention turns to the victim's corporate role and public legacy. Commentary contrasts executive responsibility with systemic outcomes. The narrative increasingly separates personal culpability from institutional critique. Courts maintain focus on the defendant's actions alone. Pretrial motions address evidence, scope, and witness lists. Schedules are set for subsequent hearings. Legal timelines extend beyond immediate public interest cycles. Observers anticipate prolonged proceedings. Media outlets prepare for sustained coverage. Public discourse remains active despite limited new facts. Authorities urge patience as the case develops. Analysts emphasize adherence to due process. The investigation transitions fully into the judicial phase. Fact-finding becomes centralized within the court. External speculation is discouraged. Institutional scrutiny continues alongside legal process. The case's symbolic weight persists. Accountability debates remain unresolved. Structural questions outlast procedural steps. The inquiry advances incrementally. Resolution remains distant. The case moves forward under judicial oversight. Part 5 explores how the case influences broader public policy debate as legal proceedings continue at a measured pace. Lawmakers reference the shooting when discussing regulation, transparency, and oversight in the healthcare sector. Advocacy groups amplify long-standing complaints about access, cost, and administrative denial. Industry representatives respond by emphasizing compliance and regulatory complexity. Analysts note how the case accelerates conversations that predated the crime. Media coverage increasingly separates the act of violence from systemic critique. Commentators caution against conflating policy reform with justification of crime. Courts reiterate that reform debates fall outside judicial determination. Attention returns periodically to the defendant's conditions of detention and legal rights. Defense motions challenge aspects of evidence collection and interpretation. Prosecutors maintain focus on intent, preparation, and execution. Expert witnesses are anticipated to address behavioral and forensic questions. Scheduling complexities extend timelines further. Public patience continues to thin amid limited developments. Authorities manage expectations regarding speed and outcome. Online discourse remains active, often detached from court proceedings. Symbolic narratives persist despite evidentiary constraints. Institutions respond with incremental policy reviews. Corporate governance discussions intensify. Risk management and executive security gain prominence. Federal agencies monitor for potential copycat behavior. Preventive messaging is emphasized. Analysts stress the importance of distinguishing grievance from violence. The case continues to shape public trust narratives. Transparency demands increase across sectors. Legal standards remain unchanged. Reform proposals vary in scope and feasibility. Debate broadens beyond healthcare into corporate accountability. Media frames the case as a catalyst rather than a cause. The defendant's trial preparations continue. Judicial oversight remains central. Public scrutiny persists. Institutional reflection deepens. Resolution remains pending. The narrative maintains complexity. no definitive conclusions are drawn. The case advances incrementally. Broader implications continue to unfold. Accountability debates remain active. Structural questions endure. Legal process proceeds deliberately. The inquiry approaches its final stage. Part 6 concludes by assessing how the case reshapes public expectations around justice, corporate responsibility, and institutional trust. Analysts observe that the shooting becomes a lasting reference point rather than a closed incident. The legal outcome remains focused on individual criminal responsibility. Courts emphasize that motive does not negate culpability. Sentencing considerations center on premeditation and harm caused. Broader systemic grievances remain outside judicial resolution. Public discourse continues to separate the act of violence from its symbolic interpretation. Some view the case as a warning about unchecked corporate power. Others stress the danger of normalizing political violence. Institutions respond by reinforcing security and risk mitigation. Corporate leaders increase visibility around compliance and transparency. Healthcare policy debates persist independently of the trial's outcome. Advocacy efforts continue to pressure regulators and legislators. Media retrospectives frame the case as emblematic of wider social tension. The victim's role becomes less central than the system he represented. Accountability discussions shift toward long-term reform rather than immediate blame. Trust in institutions is portrayed as fragile and cumulative. Restoring confidence is described as a gradual process. The case leaves unresolved questions beyond the courtroom. Structural inequities remain contested. The investigation formally concludes within the justice system. Public interpretation continues beyond legal closure. The narrative resists definitive moral framing. Facts are allowed to stand without instruction. The case remains part of ongoing cultural memory. Its influence extends into future policy and security discussions. Violence is reaffirmed as unlawful regardless of grievance. Systemic critique continues through lawful channels. The story ends without universal consensus. Resolution is legal rather than social. The inquiry closes under judicial authority. Debate persists beyond the verdict. Institutional scrutiny does not fully subside. Reform conversations remain active. The case concludes as a reference point. Its implications outlast the trial. Accountability remains an evolving concept. Public trust remains under examination. The narrative ends with restraint. No singular lesson is imposed. Interpretation is left to society. The case concludes.